Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our celebration of Patriots Week. Our presenter today is Dr. Jen Janofsky, and she's going to be talking about a recent archaeological discovery at the Red Bank battlefield involving some what are purported to be Hessians in a mass grave. So this is another year where we are focusing our Patriot Week not on the Patriots, oddly enough, but New Jersey has such a rich history and is really the crossroads in terms of the American Revolution, that soldiers from everywhere either fought or marched through it, whether you're talking about continental or militia from different colonies, whether you're talking about British regulars or British loyalists from different colonies, as well as the Hessian mercenaries that the British Crown recruited. So New Jersey has such a rich history, and we love to explore all of it because it really does tell a more complete and accurate story of New Jersey's role in the American Revolution. So Dr. Jen Janofsky is the Giordano Fellow in Public History and the director of the Red Bank Battlefield Park. She teaches classes in public history and American material culture, and also directs the History Department Internship Program. At Red Bank, Jen is responsible for all aspects of park management, including park interpretation, educational programs, special events, and exhibits. So I'd like to extend our welcome to Jen for presenting to us today. Before we jump into our presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of Jen's presentation, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. Jen has graciously provided me with a fact sheet about the battlefield that I will be sharing in the chat once we get underway. If you have problems downloading the PDF from the chat, don't worry, it'll be available as an attachment in the follow-up email that will also include a link to the recording. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey available. If you have time, we ask that you please complete the survey. We always love hearing your feedback. And if you want some more information on the Red Bank battlefield, there is a link on the screen there. I will also be sending that out in the chat so you have a live link and you can explore that at your leisure. For those of you who might not be familiar, this is what your dashboard should look like if you are using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure that it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that. That'll alert me, and I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully resolve any problems that you are having. And as I mentioned before, if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat button to send them to us, and we'll be happy to address them at the end of the presentation. And then one last thing before we jump in, there is a brief disclaimer for today's presentation. This presentation will show images of actual human remains, so viewer discretion is advised. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen now.
Thanks so much, Andrew. So let me just share my screen so we can get started here. And thanks to everybody who is joining us today. I am very excited to be able to share this project with you and to give you all an update on what's been going on since August of 2022. So again, my name is Jen Janofsky. I'm a professor of public history at Rowan University. I'm also the director of Red Bank Battlefield Park. And this is our project team. So in as much as I'm offering this presentation today, this is very much a team project. And I think it's important that you all get to know who some of these important individuals are beyond me. So specifically regarding the archaeology project, I'm the co-director along with Wade Katz, who is the project co-director with me. Wade is our project archaeologist. He's principal of South River Heritage Consulting. Frequently, you'll hear me refer to Wade in this presentation because he is our archaeologist, and we work very closely together on this project. We are also fortunate to work with another group of professionals who are remarkable specialists in their fields. Dr. Thomas Christ is a bioarchaeologist at Utica University, and he is helping us with the forensic and bioarchaeology analysis of our human remains. Anna Delaney is the forensic anthropologist with the New Jersey State Police, and we'll get into that relationship in the presentation. And Dr. Robert Seelig is our project historian, typo there. So fun fact, professors don't always review their slides in advance. So hopefully that's the last typo we're going to see. But Bob is our project historian. We are lucky to have many funders of this project and many wonderful partners. We've received funding from Gloucester County's Office of Land Preservation, from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. The New Jersey Historical Commission has long been a funder and supporter of the work we're doing at Red Bank. Rowan University has provided generous support through matches for grants, but also in encouraging my work with students on this project. The New Jersey State Police Office of Forensic Science was our partner in the removal of the remains. Our Office of Emergency Management through Gloucester County and the West Deptford Police were crucial to providing security to maintain the integrity of the site while we worked. And as Andrew said, just to reiterate, there are images of human remains in this presentation. And this presentation is the intellectual property of the Red Bank Battlefield Archaeology Project. This presentation will be shared, so you can review it. You can watch it again with family and friends. We just ask that you do not take any screenshots of the images. We are fiercely protective of the 15 individuals that we recovered, and we never want to see images of remains out of context in the social media world. So we appreciate if you would refrain from that. A land use acknowledgement statement before we get started. Red Bank Battlefield Park is a multi-component site dating from the late Archaic period to the late Woodland periods. In fact, this past summer, working in archaeology, we actually found more material related to the indigenous populations that inhabited that landscape than we did material related to the battle. So a little bit of background. Some of you are probably very familiar with Red Bank, and some of you might not be familiar with us at all. So for those of you who are new to meeting us, first of all, welcome. I'm so happy to have you on board. But we are a 44-acre park. We're located in Gloucester County, New Jersey. We are a part of the Gloucester County Department of Parks and Recreation. We are located on the Delaware River, and we are directly across from Philadelphia Airport and Fort Mifflin. So each year, 200,000 people visit the park, and our public programs draw about 15,000 visitors a year. In terms of our park use, I think one of the fun things about working at Red Bank is that we have so many different interests by people who use our park. So for example, we have recreational trails. You can walk along the Delaware River. You can see the Philadelphia Navy Yard. You can watch the planes taking off and landing at Philadelphia Airport. For the history folks, we have the remains of Fort Mercer. We have monuments, we have cannons, we have a trench system from 1777. And we also have the home of James and Ann Whitall, who inhabited this space beginning in 1748. So just by way, quick background on Fort Mercer and the Philadelphia campaign, so everybody's up to speed on the battle. So the British took Philadelphia in September of 1777. And so according to the traditional rules of warfare, when the rebels' capital falls, the war is supposed to be over, the rebellion is to be ended. But that was not the case with Philadelphia. In fact, it had just begun to get started. And so the British were entrenched in Philadelphia, and one of their primary concerns was getting supplies into the city. It's September, fall is upon them, winter is going to be coming. The easiest, quickest, most efficient way to supply the city is through the Delaware River. But as you can see, I'll put my cursor over this. The Delaware River is pretty much occupied by the American forces. On the New Jersey side, you see here Fort Red Bank. This is Fort Mercer. This is the property of Ann and James Whitall. Across the river is Fort Mifflin. To the south on the New Jersey side is Fort Billingsport. And lining the Delaware River are river obstructions known as chevaux de frise. And so these river obstructions were designed to pierce pierce the hulls of ships trying to advance along the Delaware River into the city of Philadelphia. And you can see here are the river obstructions. Here are the British ships that are stuck behind that line and unable to access the city of Philadelphia. The Pennsylvania Navy pilots absolutely understood where these river obstructions were, and in true sort of rebellion fashion, they would head out onto the river and cause nonstop trouble for these British ships who could not advance. Stuck in the middle of all this is a Quaker family, the Whitehall family. If you visit the park today, we're 44 acres, but the Whitehall family plantation actually encompassed over 400 acres. And so if you're familiar of National Park, basically the entire borough was the property of the Whitehall family. They were pacifists, obviously, because they were Quakers. They certainly did not support the seizing of their property to construct Fort Mercer, which is like literally yards away from this house. And their beloved fruit orchards, for which they were known and was a primary source of income, became the raw material for the construction of Fort Mercer. So, who are the cast of characters involved in this battle? Defending the garrison is Colonel Christopher Green and the 1st and 2nd Rhode Island regiments. So I always tell my students you should not have history heroes because they will break your heart. But I do allow Christopher Green. I think he's a really interesting individual who dies far too young. He dies during the Revolution. And he is the one who is charged by George Washington with defending the fort. And so you can see here, George Washington writes to Christopher Green, the post with which you are entrusted is of the utmost importance to America. The whole defense of the Delaware absolutely depends on it. And I always think about Christopher Green reading this letter thinking, oh boy, like this is a really big deal. This is a really big moment. What makes the Rhode Island regiments so interesting historically is that it is a fully integrated fighting regiment in 1777. And so that means in the ranks of the Rhode Island Regiment were just under 50 African-American and Native American soldiers fighting side by side to defend Fort Mercer. After 1778 at Valley Forge, those units get reorganized, and that is when the Black Regiment that you might be familiar with is created. But at this moment, in October of 1777, this is an integrated fighting unit. So there's roughly 500 individuals in the garrison, including the 6th Virginia Regiment and a contingent of New Jersey militia. Attacking the fort are the Hessian forces. As Andrew mentioned, the Hessians are having a moment. So I hope you have the opportunity to read Dr. Frederica Baer's book about the Hessians. It really complicates who these individuals were. For our purposes, we are talking about Emil von Donop, as you can see right here. He is in charge of roughly 2,400 officers and men. In bold here, von Linsing, von Minnigerode, and von Mirbach, these are the battalions and the regiment that attack Fort Mercer. The von Lengerke and the Jaeger Corps are held in reserve. So there's 2,400 total, but there's about 1,200 attacking. So it's 1,200 versus 500 Americans. So if you were a betting person on October 22nd, 1777, your money would probably be on the Hessian forces. This is the premier fighting force of the 18th century. They are seasoned, they are experienced. The Americans are still trying to get their feet underneath them. Things had not been going well for them in the Philadelphia campaign. And so the odds of the Americans winning this day are very low. But as we know, what happens, it's a devastating loss. In the late afternoon of October 22nd, the Hessian battalions, supported by the Jaeger Corps, attack Fort Mercer. Fort Mercer held strong for a variety of reasons. I would strongly encourage you, if you can, to come to Red Bank this spring and summer and take one of our guided battlefield tours, where we get into all kinds of detail about logistics, bad decisions, who said, who ordered von Donop to advance and who said that maybe you should wait until you have naval support. So it's a whole complicated story. But at the end of the day, the Americans actually succeed. They defeat the Hessians. The battle is over only 40 minutes into it, and it's a decisive victory for the Americans. Within minutes of the battle beginning, von Donop was mortally wounded. He took a musket ball to the hip, basically almost shears his leg entirely off, and he ends up dying a few days after the battle. 3 out of the 4 officers commanding attacking battalions were killed or wounded. So right at the beginning of the battle, you have a dramatic loss in leadership. And the Hessian casualties are variously reported to total approximately 400 men, which is about 17% of the attacking force, which is an astronomical number in the Revolutionary War. In terms of the Hessian reaction post-battle, what they wrote about it, what they reflected on, there's a consistent theme of the absolute violence and devastation and loss felt by these individuals. So, for example, there was a Hessian officer who said there was nothing to do but die or retreat. Lieutenant Colonel Ludwig von Worm says, "It is painful for me to lose so many good men. I can't describe and have not recovered from it." So, following the battle, October 23rd, 1777, Christopher Green orders the garrison to bury the dead. And we know from some firsthand accounts, there were so many dead that it took practically the entire day to bury them. The primary source material that we rely on when we're doing archaeology has several maps that indicate where individuals were buried. Many of the soldiers who were injured were taken to the Whitehall House, which served as a field hospital. And there's various accounts that note that following a soldier's death, they were buried, as you can see here on this map, outside of the fort between the Whitehall House and the fort walls, a mass grave. Von Donop's grave was just to the south, but we know in terms of where the burials were, this was the major area along the bluff. And in fact, historical records throughout the 19th and 20th centuries document remains being washed out from the bluff of the Delaware River. And so that was considered to be the primary burial site. So jump forward to today. Why do we do archaeology at Red Bank Battlefield? And really, there's 2 main reasons. Number one, we are on the National Register, the Federal National Register, and we are also on the New Jersey State Register. And so consequently, whenever we have construction projects, landscaping projects, paving projects, we are required to do an archaeological survey. But the other reason why we do archaeology is to understand how this landscape has changed over time. The Delaware River has changed dramatically. The landscape has changed dramatically. When you visit Red Bank Battlefield Park, you see a beautiful landscaped park. You don't see the remains of a fort. And so archaeology helps us better understand the footprint of Fort Mercer. In terms of the history of archaeology in the park, when I first started my tenure at Red Bank, which was roughly 2012, I think, I was surprised to find that there had not been any formal archaeology survey of the battlefield. So I am a traditionally trained historian. I work with paper, I work with archives. I am not trained in archaeology, but I was very curious about archaeology. I was curious, like, what was left of Fort Mercer? How can we better understand this landscape? So we applied for and received a grant from the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program. The purpose of the grant was to determine a number of things. Number one, did we have any more burials in the park? Because if we did, we want to make sure that they are stabilized, preserved, and not in danger of erosion. We also wanted to understand the core area of the battlefield and how much of Fort Mercer's footprint could we recover. Wade Katz, at that point, was with James Milner and Associates in Westchester, later Commonwealth Heritage. Wade was our project director, and it was the first systematic study of the battlefield. So working with Wade and the tremendous professionals that he brought with him really opened my eyes to the value of archaeology, but also the value of public archaeology. So as a public historian, it is always my goal to eliminate barriers to history. So I know you all like history, it's why you're on this call today, but it might come as a surprise to you that not everybody enjoys history. And so one of the things that archaeology does is it's very democratic. It makes it very approachable to understand history. You can see it happening in real time. And so with Wade and the archaeology team, and here's Wade here, and then next to Wade is Dr. Bob Seelig, who was a project historian for that project. And this is Dave Orr, a retired National Park Service archaeologist. What they did with our park visitors was made history real. They put history in people's hands as they were working. So for me to see a park visitor hold an object that had just come out of the ground, that had not seen the light of day for 250 years, and to see a park visitor have that moment of connection with history is very, very powerful. And so a small portion of our budget on that project was devoted to public participation. And here's a school group that visited with us. Keep in mind, this was 9 years ago. And one of these students actually is about to graduate with a degree in archaeology. So something happened when that kid was visiting with us, which makes me very excited to think that they experienced that connection. But it laid a foundation for me. It made me realize that there's a lot that we could do with archaeology in the park to not only better preserve and interpret the site, but also how we can work with the public. So in the fall of 2020, neighbors of the park approached Gloucester County to see if they were interested in purchasing a 1/4 acre lot that was at the very northern end of the park's boundary. And that's the image that you're seeing right here on the screen. It was literally separated from the main body of the park by a chain link fence. And so when we went out to visit the site and take a look at it, one of the things that we noticed was that the Fort Mercer trench system that was in the main body of the park appeared to continue to run through this lot, as you can see here, the sort of depression area. And it was really interesting because it was undisturbed, pristine, and an excellent opportunity to get a better understanding of Fort Mercer's trench system. So in early 2021, Gloucester County's Office of Land Preservation purchased the lot, and we were very thankful because obviously this was a tremendous resource. So to give you a sense of where we were in the park, here's the main body. This is the northern boundary, and here is the project area. So we received funding from the New Jersey Historical Commission, a project grant, and the purpose of the grant was to study the new parcel. What do we have here? What can we learn from it? That included metal detecting and ground penetrating radar. And also, we wanted to create a public archaeology program, so get broad public participation in this process. So once again, we retained Wade Katz. He was going to lead the project, and together, Wade and I created a public archaeology program. The project team grew over time. So initially, we were working with Dana Link of Great Chain Archaeological Consultants. Anna Delaney joins the team later, as does Stuart Alexander, Dave Orr, Tom Chris. Heather Hooley, Westchester University students, did ground penetrating radar before we started the project. And many also professional archaeologists volunteered their time to work with us. We were lucky to work with the Gloucester County chapter of the Archaeology Society of New Jersey, who provided expertise and assistance as our public was working in their units. This is one of my favorite pictures from the project. This is archaeologist Dana Link, and to me, it's my favorite because it just really captures the spirit of the project. So not only was this about allowing the public to work a screen and identify artifacts and know and experience the joy of discovery, but it's also about learning about the archaeological process. Why do we do it? How can we learn from it? How does this influence the story that we tell in the park? So together we had over 100 volunteers who contributed to this project. And this will give you a sense, this is an image that gives you a sense of the trench cross-section that the archaeology team implemented. And so you can see it's almost like a hopscotch board coming across the trench to just sort of sample, if you will, what we had there. So we had 4 public days of participation. The last day was June 26, 2022, and that we had reached the bottom of the trench. We had found some military material, so we knew we were at 1777, things like buckles, musket balls, canister shot. But on the last day, Wade, the archaeologist, had been teasing us that with archaeology projects, the best stuff is found on the last day at the last hour, and no truer words have been spoken. Around 2 p.m., we were happy with the project. We had great discoveries. This was wildly successful. Very happy with how things had gone. One of our volunteers, Wayne Wilson, approached Wade and I and said that he thought he had discovered a human bone. And I still distinctly remember that moment, because I did not expect those words to come out of his mouth. If you remember from the historic maps that we were consulting, where we were working was not indicated on any map in any primary source as a burial site. So for there to be a bone there wasn't making a lot of sense to us. And so It put into motion a series of events that were bureaucratically complicated. So what do you do when you are a battlefield that is a county administered park in the state of New Jersey? And after many, many phone calls and consultation, we entered into a relationship with the New Jersey State Police Forensic Anthropology Unit. Anna Delaney came onto the scene. This is Anna in the bottom of the unit with Wade, and they're taking a look at the bone, which Anna determined to be a human bone, a femur, and also let us know that there were more remains there. And so at that time, we did not know whose remains these individuals were. All we knew is that we had a set of leg bones. We did not know who they belonged to. And so we made the decision to remove the remains in order to identify who these individuals were. If you take a look, this is a historic map superimposed with the Hessian regiments who were attacking Fort Mercer. So this is where we were in Fort Mercer, and here is the Mirbach Regiment. So potentially, we would have members of the Mirbach Regiment, which is sort of one of the working theories that we are processing right now. And also, if we refer back to the historic maps, there are two main maps that confirm where the major burial sites were. As you can see, this is where we were working, and there is nothing to indicate that there was a burial at that site. However, in the process of removing the remains, we were in touch with the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, and Scott Stevenson brought to our attention this very unusual powder horn that had been on display temporarily in the museum. This is from a private collection, and it is the powder horn of John Burlingame, who was a member of the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment. So it was not unusual for soldiers to mark and to carve into their powder horns and to document their experiences in the Revolution. This one in particular details the grisly aftermath of the Battle of Red Bank. So you can see down here, Red Bank, right? READ. So, we're not too hung up on literacy in the 18th century. So this is definitely Red Bank. It is a star fort. And you can see the condition of the remains. And so we have individuals who are decapitated, missing limbs. This individual over here is missing legs. This individual down here appears to have some sort of stomach wound. And so this powder horn is showing us in detail individuals buried in the trench system of Fort Mercer. And here's another view. So this is Delaware River, and it'll just give you a different perspective of the burials in the trenches. So what could cause this type of damage, and what were the injuries that we know that the Hessians were experiencing? So if we take a look at the documentation that Johann Ewald wrote in his journal about how many Hessians were injured and what their injuries were, the types of wounds that he documents are right leg shot apart, both legs shot to pieces, shot through both legs, shot through the chest and right arm, through the leg, in the arm, right arm shot off, through the left leg, through the neck and head, left foot smashed, right leg shot to pieces, right knee smashed in the left knee. And these are the people who are injured. These aren't necessarily the people who died. This is just the type of horrific injuries that these individuals were facing. So what can do that? Well, the Pennsylvania Navy, for one thing, the Pennsylvania Navy doesn't get a whole lot of attention, and I'm thinking that their time has come. I know that there's some upcoming publications that are taking a look at the role that the Navy played in the Philadelphia campaign, especially in the Battle of Red Bank. They were particularly effective. They're firing over Fort Mercer into the attacking Hessian forces. And if you take a look at the galleys that are on the river and the armaments that they have, pretty powerful stuff. In fact, we know that they were firing both chain shot and bar shot. And so chain shot and bar shot are very effective in removing a ship's rigging, a ship's masting in battle. But imagine the impact of using chain shot and bar shot against people. And that actually starts to make sense for the type of remains that we were seeing. Essentially what we have is battlefield gore. They're pieces of people. Nobody we had was completely intact as an individual. And we know from Hessian primary sources documenting the horrific impact of this weaponry. Two ships, which could not be seen, fired chain shot into the flank. The latter knocked down whole rows of men. So this is where we were working. This was that hopscotch pattern, if you recall. But as we found remains, we had to take down the walls between the units to remove those individuals. Everywhere you see a red dot is the location of a crania. And so with a minimum number of 15. Everywhere you see a yellow star is where there was a crania that was removed. And these are some of images of the remains. Initially, our volunteer found a femur. And so we had a set of long bones here that Anna is working on removing. As you can see, there's just long bones. There's nothing else left to this individual. This individual here is the most intact person that we had. They are face down. You can see vertebrae, scapula, and then a wide void where the rest of their back would have been. This is Dr. Stuart Alexander. He is a forensic dentist, and he helped us document the teeth, which are very important to help us understand who these individuals could potentially be. So why do we think these individuals are Hessian soldiers? And the short answer is the archaeological context. So what we were finding in association with those remains. And so the artifacts of battle, we have approximately 100 artifacts related to the burials. We have buttons, we have brass buttons, repoussé buttons, pewter buttons, which are not in very good shape, knee buckles, clothing hooks, fragments of fabric and leather. And so down here, you see this line of buttons in situ, potentially from a coat that may have been used to deposit remains in the bottom of the trench. You can see a repoussé button right here and a fastener right here. The buttons themselves, so buttons are extremely valuable from the archaeological context. And what we saw from the buttons is they were not American buttons. No way. They're plain fronted with a little bit of a lip, as you can see. This is a really good example of the type of buttons that we were finding. And these buttons are consistent with Hessian buttons. As you can see here, this is from a slightly later period. This is the coat for a uniform for under Frederick the Great, and the buttons are very consistent with what we have found. Also the weaponry. And so when the archaeology team was removing the remains, they would run the metal detector over them, and quite frequently there was a signal, a response. And so when they would lift the remains, they would discover musket balls, grape shot, things of that nature in association with those remains. The musket balls that were recovered are 69-inch Charleville musket bore balls. These are American balls. We only found one ball unfired that could potentially be a Hessian ball, and that was a 72-inch Hessian grenadier musket bore. And so the material found in association with the remains strongly suggests that these are Hessians. One of the more remarkable things that the archaeology team discovered, and honestly, if we had just discovered this, that would have been a great story because it is so remarkable, was a gold coin, a British gold guinea. And this was found prior to the discovery of the human remains and was a mystery. Where did it come from? Whose was it? Why was it here? Was it hidden in a coat? Was it hidden in a boot? We know that it was worth 1 month's wages for a Hessian private. So very valuable then, very valuable today. And a volunteer on our project actually found this. It came up through her screen, which was a remarkable moment. So what do we know so far about these individuals? The minimum number of individuals we have is 15. The initial news reports had us at 13, which was not incorrect. When the team was removing the remains, they took the whole soil matrix with it. So they didn't necessarily pull away all of the soil of the individuals in the field because the remains were so fragile. And so that was done in the lab. And when we got the remains into the lab, we discovered that we had 2 more mandibles, jawbones of individuals. And so now we have 15. They're all male, young to early middle-aged adults. They are of European descent, and they can tell this by the teeth. That's why it's very important that we had Dr. Stuart Alexander on site to determine if they were European or not. The bone preservation is fair to poor. The bone itself, as you can see here from one of the long bones, is not in fantastic shape. There had been water infiltration over the years, which had damaged many of the remains. A number of the individuals have well-preserved teeth that are helpful for potential DNA analysis as well as stable isotope analysis. And there's no evidence of perimortem trauma or post-mortem mutilation. So processing and analyzing the remains. Today, the remains are at the New Jersey State Police Forensic Anthropology Lab in Hamilton, New Jersey. They are very safe there. We are almost done, almost complete with the analysis. All the remains have been carefully removed from the soil matrix. Everything has been photographed, measured, and cataloged. We have been doing x-raying, CAT scanning whenever possible to document as much as possible these individuals. So what can we do with the human remains? Well, I did say that the teeth are one of our primary leads in helping us identify who these individuals could be. So in terms of DNA analysis, we did send out DNA samples for a first round of analysis. And unfortunately, that was not super productive. We're going to try another round in February, but one of the problems that they ran into with the DNA is that water infiltration introduced other DNA that has essentially overpowered our potential Hessian DNA. And so it wasn't really possible to get anything from that first round, but we're not giving up. As I said, we have February. We're going to try a different series of tests. We are also pursuing stable isotope analysis of the teeth. And so stable isotope analysis, hop back for a second. Stable isotope analysis, when you're a child, where you live and what you eat and what you drink imprints on your teeth. And so it's possible that we could potentially identify these individuals as being Hessian based on stable isotope analysis and what region of Germany they were from. And so we're going to be pursuing this in 2024. So we also are working with the tremendous resources of the New Jersey State Police to do some digital facial reconstruction. And so you are seeing skull number 9 here, and this is Officer Mo Martinez, who is working on creating a facial reconstruction of this individual. This is something that we thought would be really powerful for people to humanize who these individuals were and not just see them as a set of remains, but as individuals and as human beings. And so the next slide I'm going to show you is the work of Officer Martinez. And so here is number 9. This is a lateral view. And the reason why it is a profile view and not a full facial view is because of the pressure of the dirt essentially on the face caused it to be distorted over time. It wasn't a battlefield injury or anything like that, but they could only get a good lateral view of this individual. Don Troiani consulted on this project. If you're familiar with Don Troiani, very well-known, famous Revolutionary War artist. And we've chosen to present him here as a grenadier in the von Lossberg Regiment. So we're hopeful in the upcoming year that we will also be able to share with you a reconstruction of number 7 to again humanize who these individuals were. So the project continues. We're in the process of wrapping up the forensic analysis, processing of artifacts, artifact conservation. We're working with Dr. Bob Seelig through the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, who provided us with an incubation grant to do in-depth research on who these potential Hessians could be. And so he has actually been over to Marburg, to the archives, and is digging deep to try and reconstruct who these individuals were. When we can get confirmation of who these individuals were, then we will discuss reinterment and commemoration. And the idea is that everybody strongly agrees that we would like to reinter at Red Bank Battlefield create a memorialized space in the park where they were discovered, and also offer interpretive signage so that people can understand who these individuals were. And so in 2023, we received a grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission that allowed us to pursue more archaeology and a public archaeology project, which happened this past summer. And so it also supported extensive ground penetrating radar to determine if we had any more burials in the trench system. And we also had public participation days. So in 2022, we had 100 individuals, and this past year we had 200 volunteers. We will be back again this summer. And if that's something that interests you, if you would like to participate, if you drop me an email, I will be happy to put you on our contact list. We were also very fortunate to work with Rowan University, Wade Katz and I, to create a new summer field school class called Battle Lab, Archaeology and Public History at Red Bank Battlefield Park. And these are some of our amazing students who really didn't know very much at all about archaeology before starting on the project. And by the end, we're pretty accomplished experts working with our public, helping them to understand why we do archaeology, while themselves learning all about the archaeological process. And we'll be back again this summer with that class. We're also fortunate to receive funding from the Society of the Cincinnati to support conservation of some of the objects found in our project. And so that includes buckles, buttons, and gunflints, and that will be on display in the spring of 2024 at the Whitehall House. So stay tuned for that. So the discovery of a mass grave certainly prompts a reconsideration of the stories that you tell on a battlefield. Personally, I can say I've given dozens and dozens of battlefield tours, and the numbers 300 dead or injured has always sort of rolled off of my tongue without a lot of consideration. And that personally has changed for me. We're telling a different story at Red Bank. We are working with our park visitors and with our volunteer docents to help convey the violence and absolute horror of a battlefield. You know, when we think about the revolution and we think about Lexington and Concord, you don't talk about the violence, you don't talk about the pain, and you don't talk about the suffering. And so this discovery certainly prompts us to reconsider the conversation that we're having with our visitors in our park. We were fortunate enough to receive funding from the New Jersey Historic Trust to support a new battlefield interpretive plan, which we will be working on in 2024. And again, I had mentioned we received an incubation grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities to support further research on who these individuals were. We're also curious about how that loss impacted German communities. So what was it like when all of these individuals did not come home? What is the memory of Red Bank and the battle in these communities? And can we connect with a modern day descendant community? This is a picture here of Eliane Meschernick. She visited with her family, her young family of 5 from Germany this past summer. She had heard about the project, she had been following the project, and she is a descendant of a Hessian soldier, not necessarily one of ours, but wanted to visit the site. And she brought a flag and she brought a memory stone. So not only is this project really connecting with people here in the United States, but it's also connecting with German communities overseas, which is extremely exciting. And so to wrap it up here, this is Captain Johann Ewald, and he remembered many, many years later that the defeat at Red Bank was especially sad for me. I lost 5 of my oldest friends, and 4 of my best friends were severely wounded. And as long as I have served, I have not left the battlefield in such deep sorrow. And lastly, in September of 2022, after our project announcement, which had been in August, I was reading the paper, and this headline caught my eye in the New York Times: "The Singular Offense of the Mass Grave" by Roger Cohen. This article was about the recovery of mass graves in the Ukraine, but the way that Roger wrote about these mass burials absolutely resonated with our project. And he writes, "Every culture wants to memorialize its dead. Every family needs the missing to be identified to reach closure. And perhaps that is why a wartime mass grave offends something so deep in the human conscience. Any mass grave demands of our humanity the reconstitution of the individual's lives ended here. And that is exactly the project that we are embarking on in 2023, 2024. This is our contact information. You can please feel free to email me or Wade. We're always happy to answer questions about the project. If you want to be added to our email list to get updates and sign up for public archaeology projects, you can always find me through the history department at Rowan University. And I hope that you reach out and let me know if you have any questions. And so I know we have time now, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm happy for Andrew to field some of those questions and answer what you're curious about.
All right, thank you so much, Jen. If anybody does have questions, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A or the chat feature, and we'll be happy to address them. And we've had a few come in, so we can jump right in. Are you planning to use the DNA analysis to associate or find descendants in Germany?
That's a good question. We would like to. There are certainly projects that are doing similar work to that. The first round of DNA analysis was not what we wanted, to be honest. We were hoping for better results, but we haven't given up on it. And so to connect with that descendant community would be remarkable. In fact, we have received many emails from descendants, from individuals interested in learning more about the project from Germany. So we know that there is a strong interest there. It's just going to be dependent on the quality of the DNA if we can take it that far.
The location of the crania are confined to a very small location in the trench. Why did you not expand the area a little more within the trench to try and find more crania?
That's a really good and hard question. And the short answer is resources. And so we have been stretched to the max with our 15 individuals. So we do know that there are others buried there. We simply could not get to them. We know where they are through ground penetrating radar and also through surveyor points that were dropped at the end of the project. We know where they were and so, or where they are. So if we do want to go back at some point with more robust funding and more resources, that is a possibility. But for now, the individuals that we removed are the ones that were exposed, and that has kept us, certainly busy for this past year and a half.
I have been told that there are Hessians buried in the Woodbury in the Friends Meeting Cemetery. Is that true? And are there other Hessian graves in the area?
So that's a really interesting question. And that's actually something that we have been pursuing as a team this past year and a half, trying to understand where the other burials could be. I don't know that there are any in the Woodbury Friends burial ground. That seems like that would have been a major issue with that Quaker community. However, we do know from historical resources that there were Hessians buried at the Strangers Burial Ground, which was moved in the early 20th century. And so we know that there are Hessians buried at Glendora, and there are also rumors of Hessian Run in National Park, that there could be individuals buried there. And so it is something on our research agenda to better understand where those individuals could have been buried.
Is the Whitehall home a museum? You have mentioned this already. You may have mentioned this already.
It is. It's a historic house museum. You are absolutely welcome to tour it between April and October. We have displays of artifacts inside the house, and we know that when people visit our park, they don't necessarily want an hour and a half long tour. If you do want an hour and a half long tour, because I know that you're probably an interested audience, we would be more than happy to offer that. For spring 2024, check out our website through Gloucester County Parks and Recreation. We're going to be offering specialized tours this year, archaeology tours, Native American history tours. And so hopefully there's something there that piques your interest and you'll come visit with us.
Where did the Hessian forces land and how did they get to the fort?
Ooh, good question. They came from Philadelphia. They crossed at Cooper's Ferry. They then went to Haddonfield, and from Haddonfield, they advanced onto the fort.
Who was the Hessian soldier? What were their reasons for enlisting?
That's a great question. And again, if you're interested in this question, you should certainly check out Frederica Baer's book, because she really goes into how diverse this group of soldiers were. You had officers who were seasoned, had, participated in military engagements their whole career, were very curious about North America. They were sort of, gentlemen botanists and scholars, and they wanted to check out the flora and the fauna of North America. You had young soldiers who didn't necessarily have anything going for them in Germany. So they could have been the second born son or the youngest son. And there was nothing financially left for them to do. And so they go into becoming a soldier and you travel the world. There were certainly people who were drafted and recruited to fill the ranks of the Hessian soldiers. But so they're an extremely diverse group of individuals with varied interests. None of them anticipated this being a long, drawn out, bloody conflict. I think almost everybody thought this thing was going to be over really quickly and not see, especially in 1777, the opening volley of the revolution, the tremendous loss that they saw at Red Bank.
Where are the American soldiers buried?
That is also a good question. We're not sure. We're always on the lookout for where they could potentially be. It's one of the reasons why we did extensive ground penetrating radar, is to try and get a sense of what else might be at the park. We don't want to inadvertently disturb a grave in the process of doing archaeology work, or even just normal care and maintenance of the park through like landscaping projects. And so we are still on the lookout for that, and we'll certainly let folks know if we were to discover them.
Is it possible to draw any conclusions from the remains about their ages when they were killed?
Yes, and so through teeth, most of them look to be young to middle aged. And when I say young, we do have one individual who looks to be about 18 years old, which is pretty sobering to think about that as a mother of a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and also a college professor, to think about how sad that must have been for that individual to be so far from home, from their family, and to meet their fate the way that they did. It's a very sobering, it was a very sobering piece of information when we were working on that project.
Was von Dunup's grave washed away from the river bluff?
Poor Von Donop. So Von Donop's grave seems to have been disturbed almost as quickly as he was buried. By the 1830s, 1840s, there's really no Von Donop left at Red Bank because people had been taking his remains as souvenirs. In the 1800s, there's a lot of interesting tourism activity taking place at Red Bank. So people would take a ferry from Philadelphia and tour the battlefield. And there's these newspaper accounts of them finding bones, remains, musket balls, cannonballs, and a lot of material walked away from the battlefield during the 19th century and even into the 20th century. Where Von Donop, there's essentially no Von Donop left. Have been rumors for years of a Von Donop skull potentially in the Rutgers collection. Actually Tom Christ, who works on our project, and Dr. Rich Veit of Monmouth University have both determined that that is not the skull of Von Donop, it's the skull of a young woman. So, you know, in terms of where Von Donop is, I'm afraid that his grave was hit pretty hard by relic hunters in the 1800s.
It appeared that there was some string-like material in the long bone photo. Can you explain that?
That's just bone deterioration. That's like from that water infiltration that essentially is rotting the bone, if that makes sense. In a good set of human remains, see, I've gotten a crash course now in bioarchaeology and forensic anthropology. If you had like the knee bone and the hip bone, they could determine the height of an individual. If bones are in a well-preserved state, you can even tell if they had suffered from illnesses in the course of their life because it imprints on the bone itself. Our bones are in such poor condition that that was simply not possible to determine. And so that string-like material is just the breakdown of the bone, essentially.
Excellent presentation. Can you discuss where the original mass grave was located and if it was post-battle or later, and the one apparently under the parking lot?
Yes. And so if you're familiar with Red Bank, if you are walking north from the Whitehall House towards the monument area, there is the giant bluff that is like above what we call the beach area, which is fill that was brought in 1980s to stabilize the park. And so that bottom beach area is all new. So the bluff area between the fort and the house is where the mass burial was located. We do know from primary source records, especially in the 20th century, in the early 1900s, the Delaware River is right up against that bluff and it's eroding individuals out. We know that there was work done in the 1930s in the White House, and when they actually were working in the basement, they found a barrel of bones presumed to be Hessians, just from the bones were just constantly being exposed, and I guess at some point they would get enough of them and they would remove them. When in 2014 we had that first grant to take a look at that space, Wade Katz and his team did open 2 units where we thought there was the potential for human remains, and there was nobody there. So the operating theory is that those individuals have been washed out over the years, and that on the bluff area there is nobody left.
If you are successful in obtaining DNA from the remains, what is the intended use?
Good. So that's a good question. And it's basically about identifying these individuals. There's a number of different ways to confirm if we have Hessian soldiers. So we believe we have Hessians based on the archaeological context, but science is the only way to 100% confirm where these individuals originated from. So you can do that with DNA. You can also do that through stable isotope analysis through the study of the human teeth. And so in theory, if one of these individuals had great DNA, we would love the idea of connecting to a descendant community. But really, we would be more than happy to settle for, can you please just tell us if these are 100% Hessian soldiers? Because that's what really we need to reinter these individuals. We don't want to reinter people and not have some sort of signage, memorial, who these individuals were. So we're waiting on that science to help us move forward with the next phase of the project.
Is there any indication that the Hessians knew of the Pennsylvania Navy station, given the impact that it had?
That is also a good question. Not necessarily. It's difficult to know what they knew and what von Donop knew. Apparently, there's communication between von Donop and Howe, who is saying, don't attack Fort Mercer just yet. Just give us some more time to get the British Navy through the Chevaux. So they're waiting on the Augusta, which is a 64-gun ship, huge, the likes of which nobody had really ever seen on the Delaware River before. And other ships, including the Roebuck and the Merlin, were there to offer naval support to engage with the Pennsylvania Navy and allow for the Hessians to more successfully attack Fort Mercer. And so how much they knew about the Pennsylvania Navy, I think, is somewhat limited, only because the Pennsylvania Navy is a very organic organization. And so it's, not necessarily organized like the Army or the Continental Army. It's when individuals show up and who is available that day. And so I don't think they estimated that the Pennsylvania Navy would be involved. There are so many things that they did not estimate. They didn't have the correct pieces to attack the fort. They didn't have ladders to scale the walls. It was really a remarkable over assumption by von Donop of what the Americans were capable of. Also, in association with the Rhode Island regiments, working with a French engineer who reconfigured Fort Mercer to draw the Hessians into one particular point in the fort and concentrate their firepower there. And so that's where the Mirbach regiment took a tremendous loss of life.
Not all Hessians were from the states of Hesse. Are there any records of the original states the soldiers were from?
So for our individuals, that's what we're looking into. That's what Bob Seelig has been working on. And of course, the Hessian forces traveled around the world. And so in theory, you could have international Hessians. They're recruiting along the way. You could have people, as far away as Russia or India being incorporated into the Hessian ranks. Frederica Baer's book does document quite well the number of different German states that contributed soldiers to the war effort. We're just really trying to reconstitute that Mirbach regiment. Who was in the Mirbach regiment? Frustratingly, the returns from October 22nd, 23rd do not list the names of the individuals lost in the battle. And the theory is that because the losses were so, number one, huge and dramatic that nobody could take down all of the names. It would have been a Herculean task. Possibly the adjutant who was in charge of the record keeping also perished in the battle. So we don't have those list of names. And so the work that Bob Seelig has been doing is reconstituting that Mirbach regiment so we can at least start to get some names of people, potentially identify which German states they were from, which could give us a better understanding of who our 15 individuals might be.
If you get a good DNA sample that doesn't match a Hessian soldier, I assume that you will assess if this person is an American soldier, correct?
Correct, right. And that's a really interesting observation. There is a possibility that remains could have been commingled. And so we know that 14 Americans died in the battle. The odds that they would have been buried with Hessian soldiers are very low. That's just not how burials took place on a Revolutionary War battlefield. Especially at Fort Mercer. We believe that there's a chance that the American soldiers could have been buried in the interior of the fort and the Hessian soldiers buried in the exterior of the fort, such as the trench system. Certainly, if that DNA comes back as non-European, then the next question is, are they Rhode Island? Is that Rhode Island DNA? Is it New Jersey DNA? And so working with Anna Delaney and Tom Christ is a real education in understanding how science can certainly inform our understanding of what we're working with here.
Was there any archaeological material related to the explosion of the Augusta?
No, though that would be super interesting. This past summer, we did recover, we were deep in the bluff right outside of the monument, and we did recover a lot of charred wood. And our working theory is it's from when the fort was slighted so that it didn't fall into British hands. And so for a second, there was a moment of, well, could this be pieces of the Augusta? But probably not. The Augusta eventually floats downstream to Gloucester City, and in the late 1800s, early 1900s is exposed for a variety of reasons. There's treasure hunters who believe there was British gold stored on it, and then relic hunters, people who took pieces of the Augusta as a souvenir. There was enough enough wood of the Augusta left over that the Daughters of the American Revolution in Washington, D.C. at their headquarters, the New Jersey room is actually paneled in wood from the Augusta. And that seems to be the rest of it. That just was the extent of the Augusta. But certainly the Augusta exploding was traumatic. It blew out windows in Philadelphia. If it blew out windows in Philadelphia, it most certainly blew out windows of the White House. Absolutely horrible loss to the British Navy to lose such an incredible ship like that, and a devastating blow for the British.
You touched on this earlier, where maybe you can just say it again. What is the estimate of the amount of Hessian soldiers killed at Red Bank?
Another good question that we are following up on. The rough number is 300 dead or injured. The hard numbers are still something that we are working through. I don't think it's something that really historians have sat down and crunched all the numbers. And specifically, if you look at the Mirbach regiment, we don't even know who we lost. And so 300 is the accepted number. And certainly we'll have an update to that, as we move forward. Something to look forward to in 2024, part of this grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities is allowing us to, as a team, to document the project. And so there will be an archaeology report, there'll be a public history report, there will be a bioarchaeology report. And so a lot of the information about the battle, what we know, who these individuals were, we will be tackling that in early 2024.
Do you have an estimate of how much funding you would need in order to continue the project?
That's a great question. I frequently joke with our team that I feel like I'm sort of the parent of teenagers who are always like looking for money, but I don't have any money. One of the jobs that I do is I go out and I seek the funding. And so we have a grant in now to support stable isotope analysis, and fingers crossed we receive that. And so we can move forward with that. It's difficult to put a figure on it. at least in the tens of thousands of dollars if we want to exhaust everything. And we've been looking at different options, including a National Science Foundation grant to possibly support this. We're watching closely. Historic Jamestown is working on a burial recovery project. They're working with forensic anthropologists out of Yukon, and they're looking at extracting historic DNA. And so we're very curious how that project goes. Because number one, the remains at Jamestown are over 100 years older than who we have at Red Bank. And they're also dealing with water infiltration at Jamestown. And so definitely this is a project about patience. It's going to take time and certainly, as you indicate, a good amount of funding.
Can you talk about the Battle of Red Bank in the larger context of the American Revolution?
Sure. So what I always find fun talking to people about at Red Bank is it's this unknown battle. People are completely unfamiliar with it. They might be familiar with Mifflin, maybe, definitely Valley Forge, but they're not really sure like what happens in between. And so for me, what's interesting about the Battle of Red Bank is it's a dramatic upset. You know, this is 500 largely unseasoned Rhode Island regimenters versus the 18th century premier fighting force in the Hessians. So there's a couple of things that come out of the Battle of Red Bank that I think are really significant. One is it grabs international attention, right? So you have the French who've been sort of slowly, making their way into the American ranks in 1776, 1777. The French engineer is crucial to the success of Red Bank succeeding. His expertise on how to draw the Hessians into a trap actually seals the deal of that battle. So it grabs everybody's attention. John Adams writes to Abigail that now the world will have to pay attention to us because this victory was so dramatic. So that to me is huge. It stalls out the British, it completely frustrates them, and the Americans then have time to regroup in Valley Forge. And what happens at Valley Forge to me is also really remarkable because I think of what happens at Red Bank. And that is George Washington starts to soften his stance on the use of Black troops in battle. And I think that is largely because of the victory of Red Bank. I think Christopher Green is there in Washington's ear saying these guys can fight. And Washington sends him back to Rhode Island in that winter to recruit more troops. They come back and they form their own. They create the Black Regiment that continues on and fights, till the end at Yorktown. And so that to me is a really remarkable moment in Revolutionary War history.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Is there anything you'd like to close with, Jen?
No, just please don't be afraid to reach out. I get emails all the time about people curious about the project, asking for updates, wanting to be put on our contact list to participate in public archaeology. So please don't be shy. Please reach out and stay in touch. We're going to have an update in the spring when we have our report written, and that is a document for public consumption. It is for you to better understand the project, and looking forward to sharing that all with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jen, for a fantastic presentation. There's been tons of accolades in the chat for the depth of your knowledge, and we appreciate you sharing that with us in celebration of Patriots Week. Even though this was more about the Hessians and the Hessians' remains, it was really the Patriots themselves that that held the fort and provided a necessary delay in the British pursuing the American forces. So wonderful presentation, wonderful work you're doing at Red Bank Battlefield. And I do encourage people, if you have the chance to visit it or if you can support it in any way, please do so. And anything else, Jen?
No, that's it. Thanks so much for joining us. I always love sharing this story with everybody.
Great. And thank you everybody for joining us today for our celebration of Patriots Week. As I said before, this program is being recorded, so look out for an email with the link, or you can check out our YouTube channel, not only for this program, but a lot of our past webinars as well. So everybody be safe, be well, and have a happy new year.
Thank you, everybody.